Hi, my name is Frank A. Thomas, and I had the opportunity to speak with the Reverend Dr. Charles E. Goodman, Jr., who is the pastor at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. He was our guest for the African American Legacy Preaching Series. I want you to check out this clip from our conversation. To watch the full conversation, click the link at the end of the video or in the description below. So right off the bat, I get a sense that legacy and preachers who have come before you are important to you. So say a little bit about that, both some who came before you and why they are so important to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, my foray into preaching kind of has an interesting. I was raised United Holy Church. So I was adopted at 14 months by my maternal grandparents. Okay. And it's so interesting. When I think about the first preacher that impacted me was my grandmother. But she was raised in a time where they were not validating women in ministry to that degree. So she got her missionary license. But I would go and look throughout our house, and she would have sermons tucked in Bibles, in books. She used to ghostwrite for the bishops, which is the interesting thing. I need to find some of that stuff and do something with it. And so early on, just this, having her, my grandfather, every night reading, they would play sermons all day. I grew up in a household where I'm gonna hear G.E. Patterson on the TV. I'm gonna hear, it's so crazy, Fred Price, or whoever was on TV, whether it's CBN, TBN, I'm gonna hear them. And then going around listening to the preachers that I grew up down the street, Bishop Fields, who was around the corner at Hayes Memorial United Holy Church. But then there was some great local legends like Dr. Curtis Brown at New Light, or Dr. William Wright at New Zion, or Dr. George Brooks at Mount Zion, who are in Greensboro, who may not have the national acclaim, but man, for me as a kid, I would hear them. Every year, Dr. Curtis Brown would bring in Dr. Wesley McLaughlin from Petersburg. So he would take me to the revival. So there was something early on about preaching that I started to listen, and it just resonated with me. One of the most critical things that brought me greater exposure is when I moved to DC. My best friend got, excuse me.
So bad, I want you to stay there, but you know, this is Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes, Greensboro, North Carolina.
Right, so that's I'm just trying to set the scene for the audience. They may not know Greensboro, North Carolina. So, you know, there you were, just set the scene there a little bit. That's where you were born, raised.
I was raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. So that really was kind of the crucible of my exposure. But then that was a time before social media, you know, so we were still getting cassette tapes, you know. And so from that, one of the most pivotal things that really broadened my exposure, Dr. Thomas, was when I went with my best friend. He got drafted by the Washington Wizards, and I find myself in Washington, D.C., and I got connected to Pastor Anthony Macklin at Glendale Baptist Church, now it's the Sanctuary. And man, when I went there, because of his national exposure, I began to raid their bookstore. And I was hearing voices that I had never heard before because they weren't on the local TV where I was.
How old were you here?
I was 21. 21, 22 years old. So then I'm getting to hear a Maurice Watson, a Ralph West, Lance Watson, yourself. I'm hearing, so then once I got it, I started being a connoisseur of all these tapes, and then it became, I just want to hear all these preachers, Bishop Walter Scott Thomas, Dr. Charles Booth, Evie, I mean, things that I was getting ready to be exposed to, and it just created this hunger in me, because as much as I was growing up Pentecostal, it was something about the structure of the Baptist sermonic presentation that really appealed to not just my heart, but to my mind. And so I just really began to just study it. And that's what kind of really pushed me that way.